Chapter 21. Brush with Death. Victor directed Wiggles to smash into the silvery barrier. The oversized earthworm glowed in an eerie green light, and its muscles bungled below its armored plates that shifted as the worm prepared to charge. "Attack," Victor commanded, and his mindless undead slave complied. Wiggles coiled up, and like a spring, he unleashed his full power. The cavern shuddered as he collided. Green blood and flesh dyed the silver barrier in neon green as it rippled from the impact. "T.S. Gay." Victor floated past the half-destroyed Wiggles. His face was smashed to pieces, and hundreds of fractured teeth littered the floor. Repairing him for another attack would waste his precious stat points. "Block the view," Victor said via telepathy, and had Wiggles maneuver in front of Alice. "I still wish to hide my true form from her, especially in her current mental state." The young woman was hyperventilating and shivering while clutching her legs. Victor gave her appearance a brief look over. He still couldn't discern if his sexual attraction to humans had vanished with his species change or if she was too close to a skeleton for him to find her alluring. Her skin barely covered her ribs that poked out, and her sunken facial features and matted black hair made her look closer to a gal than a human. "I am getting distracted." Victor felt stressed but also anticipation. Everything was so exciting for once. His once dull mind had woken up. He had a lot to think about, Terry's message included. Where had it come from, and how? Victor pushed those questions to the back of his busy mind. His stats were down to an all-time low. Victor approached the barrier. As a test, he placed the tip of his claw against the surface and cautiously poked it. Despite its almost liquid metal appearance that rippled from the touch, it felt like poking a concrete wall. Hard and firm. His next test involved a spirit movement. Cautious of his stat expenditure, he only turned the tip of his claw into an ethereal blue. "Does this make me a ghost?" The effect was a little different to those spooky cartoonish monsters back on Earth, but had the same idea. Spirit movement had a very high expenditure, but it effectively removed him from the mortal plane, allowing him to move through anything. As expected, his claw passed through. 20 stats lost. Victor watched the numbers rapidly fall and then continue ticking down every second. "I really need to fix this issue." Assuming there is a solution. Victor refused to believe there wasn't a way to solve his falling stats, but with his limited information on this world, he had little choice but to soldier on and hope to find a way during his travels. Doing some quick calculations in his head, if he used a spirit movement and forced his way through this barrier, he would have around 2 hours of life force left. He took one last glance at his skills. Consume X. Raise Undead X. Shadow Magic X. Annihilating Aura X. Freezing Cone 7. Stealth X. Doom Ray X. Spirit Movement V. Apart from a Doom Ray, I don't see another solution. Victor took a deep breath yet was eerily silent, just floating there ominously like a ghost. Then, he saw Alice running alongside Wiggles. Just as she was about to catch a glimpse of him, Victor dual cast a stealth and spirit movement and pushed his way into the barrier. The silvery barrier rippled around his silhouette as he forced his way through. The barrier's magic surged to push Victor back, but he was relentless. He watched his stats fall from around 7,000 to only 4,000. The barrier groaned before shattering like broken glass. 2 enormous dragons lying beyond stirred in their sleep. One was tar black with that distinct tint that noble crone dragons like genus possessed. The other was a feminine-looking dragon with fish-like silver scales. The tar-black one was the first to stir from its deep slumber as a blood-red eye stared through Victor at the destroyed barrier. The senior dragon with wrinkles covering its leathery skin let out a tired snort and pushed its titanic body up on its hind legs. Victor didn't use mana, but even he could feel the immense power flowing through the corridor, gravitating towards this blue whale-sized lizard. Victor didn't waste a second and floated right past the old dragon. His target was the still sleeping silver one that had rolled onto her back instead of waking. Dragons sure do love to sleep, perhaps forever. Victor hovered over the dragon, reactivated spirit movement, and plunged his claw straight into the dragon's heart and another into its brain. Despite his long reach, he felt like reaching down into an abyss as it took over 3 meters before he made contact with the heart. Despite his ethereal form, Victor could feel the slow heartbeat of the female silver dragon. He was burning stats like crazy to plow through the dragon's natural mana defense and dense mana-filled muscles. Finally, with only a few minutes of life force remaining, Victor deactivated spirit movement. The dragon instantly woke up. Her ocean blue eyes immediately went to her heart, where she felt something weird. Something was caressing it. She blinked in confusion at the shadowy creature floating over her like a grim reaper. What? She snarled in her ancient language before her eyes narrowed and her mana flared. Victor almost screamed. It felt like dunking his hand in boiling water. With his last remaining strength, he squeezed the dragon's heart. The muscle was the size of an elephant, and it felt like trying to squeeze a bowling ball, but Victor triumphed. Victor scrambled the silver dragon's brain matter and tore her heart into shreds with his meter-long claws. Then, using his near 360-degree vision, Victor moved to the left to avoid a claw from the black tar dragon and reactivated stealth. Holy shit, if he hits me with anything right now, I will die. Victor was barely a glorified cloud of stain. His stats had fallen to that of an average human. Victor avoided another stray claw and cast a consume. A wisp the size of a house emerged, and his body greedily absorbed it. Victor watched with relief as his stats soared to a decent level. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 304. Level up. STR 43200, DEX 43200, Con 43200, Int 43200, WIS 43200. Life force unstable. I wish my stats would just show me my remaining time dash. The screen rippled and his debuff updated. Life force unstable, 11 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 12 hours of life. Victor had never felt so alive in both his lives. Ha ha ha, this is what living is all about. Victor turned to the old dragon. It was mourning the silver dragon's death while scanning its surroundings with blood-red eyes that gleamed with power. Well, I already killed one. Victor looked at the stairs at the end of the corridor with light shining down on its upper steps. Should I kill another? Would that be wise? And then the dragon saw Alice. Chapter 22. Black Mage. Alice awakened from her state of mind with the silver barrier shattering. The Lord had arrived. Her survival rested on his shoulders. The image of that long shadowy arm ending in curved claws that looked sharper than any blade Alice had ever seen while working for her father's merchant company flashed through her mind. What is the Lord? Is he a creature of darkness? Or was that merely an extension of his true form? Alice began to doubt that the Lord was a mere necromancer. Then, with a huff, she stood up. Her teeth chattering away from the cold and her soaked lingerie clinging to her body were doing her no favors, but Alice kept them on. She wished she could get some new clothes, but that wasn't important now. She focused and began running down the length of the massive undead worm. Alice ignored her painfully numb feet that kept slipping around on the muck of wet moss and concentrated on avoiding the many bright red fruits, enormous teeth and green sludge that littered the cavern's floor. Status, she chanted and selected the party option. Name, Alice Leader. Race, human. Level, 12. STR, 30, DEX, 42, Con, 12, Int, 72, WIS, 56. Weak slave. Name, unknown. Race, unknown. Level, 303. STR, 7130, DEX, 7130, Con, 7130, Int, 7130, WIS, 7130. Life force unstable. Name, Terry. Error, connection lost. What the hell? She double and triple checked. What happened to Terry, and what the hell happened to the unknown Lord's stats? 7,000 in each category. Last time I checked, he was level 281 with over 250,000 in each category. How did he level so fast yet lose stats? A scream of pain that sounded primal, like one from an ancient creature, filled the cavern, and Alice watched in shock. Beyond where the barrier used to be were two dragons. A large ugly tar black one was on its haunches staring in horror at the silvery one that lay on her back with blood pooling down her scales and a hole in her head. The silvery dragon's eyes had glossed over, and her pink tongue hung carelessly from her mouth and onto the floor. But the shadowy creature hovering over the dragon's corpse grabbed Alice's attention. Unfortunately, the cavern ceiling got in the way. She could only see the bottom of its legs and hands hovering just above the dragon's fatal wounds, blood dripping down its claws. And then it was gone. With a blink of her eye, the looming creature of shadows vanished into thin air without a trace. Alice cast a nervous glance at the blue status screen in the corner of her vision. Name unknown. Race unknown. Level 304. Level up. STR 43200, DEX 43200, Con 43200, Int 43200, WIS 43200. Life force unstable, out of range. So that was the Lord's doing. The level up confirmed that the creature she had just seen was indeed the unknown creature in her party. Alice shuddered. She had been discovered by a creature that could one-shot dragons, and it hadn't killed her. A weird feeling bubbled in her chest. Was she so insignificant that it didn't even bother to kill her? Or did she perhaps have a more significant meaning than she knew? Terry seemed to think so by calling her a mistress, but that guy was an idiot, and she refused to take anything he said seriously. The black-tar dragon swiped the area around the silver dragon's corpse before bellowing a breath of jet-black flames into the air. Superheated wind blew past Alice, making her hair dry and feel much better. Well, she did feel better until the old dragon turned its head and stared directly at her with its blood-red eyes and wrinkly face. Alice felt rather silly that her automatic reaction was to cover herself up under the dragon's intense stare. Luckily, the dragon turned its head back to the corridor and snarled. Alice was confident it was a type of dragon language, as it sounded far too sophisticated to be mere snarls like some kind of dog. Without warning, the shadow creature appeared on the black dragon's back, and the world went white for a brief second, followed by a flash of purple. Alice desperately rubbed her eyes and ignored her ringing ears. Although still blurry, the shadow creature had vanished again, and unfortunately, the black dragon was fine. A thin sheen of black mana shrouded the dragon like a barrier, and purple energy rippled across its surface before diffusing into the ground. Name unknown. Race unknown. Level 304. Level up. STR 41100, DEX 41100, Con 41100, Int 41100, WIS 41100. Life force unstable, out of range. Alice looked at her potential savior's stats and confirmed a suspicion. He somehow uses stats as fuel for spells. I wondered how his stats went down without a debuff appearing on his page, but now it all makes sense. Alice's previous thoughts about ways to abuse his life force unstable debuff to kill him had vanished, and now her mind raced with ways to help. Bah! Who am I kidding? How can I help? First, Alice saw a humongous fruit lying on the floor and debated hurling it at the black dragon 100 meters away. However, her puny 30 in strength crushed her dreams. An average adult human male has 50 in all stats except INT and WIS, which are usually a bit lower. Next, Alice looked at her body and could practically see the bones poking through, and not a hint of muscle remained. In fact, her heart was pounding heavily in her chest from the short run she had just done to get closer to the action. Senior Silver Dragon defeated. EXP awarded to all party members. Contribution has been calculated at 0%. EXP awarded 0.1% of total gain. Alice stared at the screen that had appeared in her vision. She had never actually used the party feature before. Why would she? Alice was a wealthy merchant's daughter, not some suicidal fool delving into the dungeon's depths. Some unknown force commanded the ambient mana and carefully directed it into her body. Level up. 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 Alice had experienced the high that came with leveling up a few times before, but she had never received so many levels at once. She felt on cloud 9. It was euphoric. Her fatigue washed away, and her mind became clear and sharp. The pang of hunger that had sat in her stomach since being rudely awakened was resolved, and she felt the best she ever had. With giddy excitement, she opened her status page. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 20 plus 8. STR, 38 plus 8, DEX, 50 plus 8, Con, 20 plus 8, Int, 88 plus 16, WIS, 72 plus 16. Unspent points, 8. Weak slave. Seeing the increased numbers made her giddy, but the most important was her increased level. I am level 20. My class should be unlocked. Blessing, darkness. Class, awakened black mage. Subclass, apprentice merchant. Divine mission, none. Skills. Without hesitation, she clicked on her class to get its full description. Black mage is the standard type of magician serving the goddess of darkness. They specialize in spells of mass destruction and lethal assassination. Throughout the years, they've been the most feared and renowned type of mage due to their dark tendencies and psychotic behavior, making them hard to control. With many cases of them causing extinction-level events, they are now hunted down before they blossom. Class effect, all spells inflict true damage. Alice slowly read through the description, making sure to not miss a single word. She was in awe and beyond excited. The description overflowed with a promise of overwhelming power. Alice could see why black mags were feared compared to other mags. Their speciality was beyond overpowered. True damage, if I remember correctly, that means my spells ignore any magical protections. Class skills are Stealth 2. Fireball I in you. Subclass skills are Fast counting I. Identify I. Alice clenched her fist with determination. Then, without hesitation, she dumped all her unspent points in her wisdom stat. INT is the size of my magic pool, whereas WIS is my ability to manipulate mana. And I'm going to need all the control I can get. STR 38, DEX 50, Con 20, Int 88, WIS 80, plus 8. Feeling slightly more confident, she ran a bit closer. The metal slave collar felt tight around her neck, a reminder of her past. She shoved those thoughts away and focused on the future. She was going to become the greatest black mage to ever live. Her plan? To kill a dragon. With a mental thought, she activated her Fireball Eye skill. Mana rushed through her reinvigorated body and down her right arm. Unfortunately, the skill didn't find a one to use, so the fireball appeared in her palm. Alice held back a hiss of pain as the orange ball hovered above her palm and burned her skin. Alice raised her head and concentrated on the black dragon's majestic form. It was preoccupied with locating the shadow creature that would appear every few seconds and slash at the dragon scales. Sometimes it would also hurl ice and purple lightning that got deflected by the dragon's mana shield before vanishing again. Much to the dragon's fury, Alice grit her teeth, raised her hand, and with all the power invested in her, she willed the fireball to fly. The little orange ball sailed through the dim cavern, lighting the way. Alice watched with anticipation as it made contact. It hit the black mana shield on the dragon's neck and passed straight through it before dissipating on one of the dragon scales. The dragon didn't even react to the mosquito bite and totally ignored her. Alice summoned another fireball. "You will regret ignoring me," she hissed between clenched teeth as she tried to ignore the pain. This time she would aim for the eyes. Chapter 23. Dragons are guard dogs. The black-tie dragon refused to die. This was the first time Victor faced an opponent that lasted more than a few seconds. I can see why dragons are graded at 10 points by the goddess, but... Victor looked at the corpse of the feminine silver dragon with brain pus trickling from a hole in her head. That dragon had to be centuries old, yet I killed it in one hit. The hackers are the same too, a sneaky claw to the head, and they are dead. Victor realized what truly mattered in this world. Stealth. Picking Netherborne came with noticeable disadvantages, such as the very world itself seeking his demise. But starting with a maxed-out stealth skill and the ability to hover around made him the perfect killing machine. Dragon, king, or god. Every living thing will have a moment of weakness where they aren't prepared to fight, and stealth allows Victor to capitalize on that chance. But as with any creature specializing in stealth, once the initiative was lost, Victor found himself at a significant disadvantage. He was reduced to occasional sneak attacks without hundreds of thousands of stat points to pour into a doom ray to obliterate this oversized lizard to the next dimension. He could run, that was always an option. Assuming there were monsters to kill on the floors below, he could power up and return to finish the job. A few more attacks and I will call it quits. I only have around an hour of life remaining. Victor saw an opening and emerged from stealth just above the dragon. He quickly spent 200 stat points on his spirit movement to try and penetrate the dragon's mana shield. His claw made contact and the dragon's mana surged to push him back. It burned like hell as Victor's life force was devoured. Failing to penetrate again, Victor vanished into the background and hovered a few meters away. Does everyone feel this pain when attacking a mana shield, or only me? Victor was starting to debate if mana was the world's power, and the ambient mana in the air was slowly killing him like a poisonous gas. While debating his next move, Victor saw a fireball soar through the air and hit the dragon. Unfortunately, it did nothing but briefly form a small hole in the dragon's black mana shield. Seeing a possible way to defeat the downed dragon, Victor followed the trajectory and saw a defiant Alice standing next to the smashed-up Wiggles. She would look heroic if not for being in her underwear and a metal slave choker around her neck. Victor saw mana swirl around the girl and go down her arm, the slight blue mist condensed on her burned palm and another, more immense fireball formed. All right. Let's do this. Victor was never one to turn down an opportunity, so he floated right next to the dragon and began chanting his Adun Ray. Half his remaining stats vanished into thin air. If this doesn't work, I'm going straight back into the tunnel and devouring Genus. Victor watched with anticipation as Alice raised her arm and, a moment later, hurled a fireball. The dragon didn't even acknowledge such a weak spell and continued searching for any sign of Victor's next attack. Victor grinned from the shadows at the dragon's stupidity. It was so overwhelmingly confident in its superior abilities that it didn't even regard the little human. The ball of orange flame sailed towards the dragon's eye. It merely blinked in response, and the fireball once again drifted through the sheen of black mana that covered the dragon's body and harmlessly dissipated on the dragon's eyelid. With the threat averted, the dragon opened its eye and its vision went white. Victor used his superior control and threaded the purple lighting through the hand-sized gap in the dragon's defenses. A sizzling sound like a juicy steak on a barbecue filled the cavern as steam rose from the dragon's eye socket. The black-tailed dragon howled at the top of its lungs, and black flames erupted between its clenched teeth. Victor skillfully dodged the fire and noticed the dragon's mana shield had briefly faltered. So it takes a mental effort to keep that shield going. No wonder the silver dragon didn't have it running while it slept. Victor pressed the advantage and rammed his claw through the dragon's eye, and flash froze the eye sludge and some of its brain nerves with a freezing cone. Before proceeding with his assault, the dragon's immense mana flared to life and danced across his scales. The black-tailed dragon shook the cavern as it crashed backwards, smashing its head side to side while howling at the top of its lungs. It kept trying to claw at the ice in its exposed eye socket. The dragon's mana chaotically flared up like spikes, leaving many weak points. Victor bared with the pain and readied his final attack. He had mere minutes left of life and refused to die here. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 304. STR, 1680, DEX, 1680, Con, 1680, Int, 1680, Wis, 1680. Life force unstable, 27 minutes and 59 seconds. Victor had confirmed that stat points worked in mysterious ways for him. Crushing a dragon's heart while so low on stats showed that they were merely the system's way of trying to quantify his life force. With his few remaining points, Victor made a spike of shadow magic around his claw and activated spirit movement before ramming the shadow spike through the dragon's eye socket and straight into his brain. A thin layer of mana shrouded the dragon's brain from magical interference, but Victor's improvised spike smashed straight through. The level up notification never came, so he toggled Annihilating Aura on for a mere second and then level up. A few stats got added and quickly vanished away with his spell expenditure. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 305, level up. STR, 308, DEX, 308, Con, 308, Int, 308, Wis, 308. Life force unstable, 5 minutes and 13 seconds. A wash of relief filled Victor as he quickly cast a Consume. A wisp of pure life force so large it dwarfed even Victor surged through his arm and became condensed into his body. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 305, level up. STR 108308, DEX 108308, CON 108308, INT 108308, WIS 108308. Life force unstable, 30 hours and 5 minutes. Skills happy smiley. Consume X. Raise undead X. Shadow magic X. Annihilating aura X. Freezing cone 7. Stealth X. Doom ray X. Spirit movement 6, a level up. With a decent amount of life force to play with, Victor used his Erase Undead skill on Wiggles. A plume of green smoke shot out of his hand, and within this cloud of smoke, bones and teeth reformed and merged with Wiggles' smashed-up body. Alice staggered to the side to avoid flying debris and collapsed on her butt while breathing heavily and nestling a burnt hand. She then did some hand movements, and Victor saw a mass of mana surge through the air and condense into a tornado around her body as if she was a funnel. Immense power radiated from her body as she glowed briefly blue. Even though the tornado produced no wind, Alice's hair whipped around, and her pink eyes gleamed as blue mana crackled through her veins. As Wiggles finished reforming, Victor checked the party status screen. Name, Alice leader. Race, human. Level, 30, level up. X10. STR, 48, plus 10, DEX, 60, plus 10, CON, 30, plus 10, INT, 108, plus 20, WIS, 100, plus 20. Weak slave. Name, unknown. Race, unknown. Level, 305, level up. STR, 108307, DEX, 108307, CON, 108307, INT, 108307, WIS, 108307. Life force unstable, 30 hours 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Name, Terry. Error, connection lost. Victor nodded his head in understanding. Somehow, likely due to the fireball, Alice had gained a large amount of EXP and leveled up a lot. Victor watched Alice's transformation with interest. Her stats seemed to increase a single point per level, but she gained 2 in the stats that match up with being a mage. Although I can only see her name and level, I suspect Alice is some kind of mage. Perhaps a fire mage, judging by the fact she threw such an accurate and weird fireball that ignored the dragon's mana shield. This world is becoming weirder and weirder. First, hackers that could directly manipulate the system appeared, and now fireballs are glitching through magical defenses. No, glitching isn't the right word, it just went through somehow. Victor had unleashed his entire arsenal of skills upon that dragon's shield and not even left a scratch. Alice obviously had some sort of unique skill that created that phenomenon. The mana tornado dissipated and left a very healthy-looking Alice behind. Her face was flushed a healthy red, and she had fattened out slightly. She was still slim, but it was less ghastly to look at. Alice seemed giddy as her finger danced across screens that Victor couldn't see with intense concentration. She would pause with her finger in the air every few seconds with a smile before scowling at something else. It was amusing, but Victor had other issues to worry about. More dragons were fast approaching. Like oversized bats, the beat of their heavy leathery wings echoed down the corridor. From this distance, Victor couldn't tell how many were coming nor how strong they were. With the surprising difficulty of the fight with the black dragon fresh in his mind, Victor decided a tactical retreat further into the dungeon was necessary. To Victor's surprise, an out-of-breath genus shot up from the hole in the cavern center, with Henry cresting the hole's ridge a second later. Henry, pick up Alice and secure her. We are retreating deeper into the dungeon. Genus, you may follow us or converse with your dragon friends. Victor's voice surprised everyone as he was currently hidden with stealth and there were 2 dead senior dragon corpses. Genus took one look down the corridor and vigorously shook his head. I will follow you, voice. Very well, Victor replied. He needed to buy some time for their retreat. Victor needed Wiggles' digging potential, so using him as a sacrificial pawn was a no-go. So what other option did he have besides the 2 almost mint-condition dragon corpses at his floating feet? With some hesitance, he cast Erase Undead on the black dragon as it had given him the most trouble and was a tough bastard to kill. Some life force vanished, but it was much less than the life force required to create Wiggles. Further proof that the condition of the corpse directly affected spells cast. Without much evidence of being dead, other than the holes in their skulls and blood-soaked scales, the zombie dragons rose to serve their new overlord. "What do you desire?" the silver-scaled dragoness asked in a snarl. "So they can speak, as expected of dragons." Victor was happy to have another fully sentient type of undead other than the humans. The goblins could also speak, but they still acted like mindless drones. This confirms my theory that a monster's intelligence directly affects their undead form. "I desire protection. Guard the tunnel and do not let a single dragon pass." Victor's ancient voice echoed through the corridor, and the two dragons bowed. Genus was already gliding down the corridor with his golden wings spread wide. Henry was charging below with Alice clutching his waist with one hand, and her other was dancing in the air across invisible screens. Victor mentally commanded Wiggles, and the enormous earthworm barreled down the corridor, spraying dust as it went and causing the ceiling to rumble. The two zombie dragons, positioned side by side, focused on their first and final order. Their demise was inevitable, yet they stood proud and strong to defend the one who killed them mere moments ago. Magic is terrifying when you think about it. Dragons reduced to guard dogs with a wave of my hand. Victor shook his head and quickly followed behind his group. It was time to power level. Chapter 24. Path to Power. Alice ignored the howling wind flying through her hair, the musky scent of the man's waist she was clutching for dear life, and her ass that burned as the horse galloped at an impossible speed. Alice didn't even have clothes or a seat to cushion the blow of horseback riding. If not for her increased con stat, Alice feared the relentless assault on her ass would smash her tailbone into smithereens. Despite the pain, Alice grinned from ear to ear as her hand danced across the blue screens that orbited her vision. Senior Black Dragon defeated. EXP awarded to all party members. Contribution has been calculated at 1%. EXP awarded 1% of total gain. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 30 plus 10. STR, 48 plus 10, DEX, 60 plus 10, Con, 30 plus 10, Int, 108 plus 16, Wis, 100 plus 16. Unspent points, 18. Slave. Blessing, Darkness. Class, Junior Black Mage. Subclass, Apprentice Merchant. Divine Mission, None. Skills. Class Skills. Stealth 2. Fireball 4 a level up. X4. Ice Bolt A new. Mana Shield A new. Subclass Skills. Fast Counting IA. Identify IA. Although Alice's weak debuff had vanished with her recent level ups, her con stat was still on the lower end for her level due to her malnourished state. Alice looked at her low con stat and frowned. Her body couldn't survive much more of this intensive horse riding that felt like she was trying to stay on a bull's back. She looked at her thin arms wrapped around Henry's waist and how her muscles were strained to stop her from flying off. Alice glanced at the floating blue screens and saw her unspent points sitting at 18. These are points the system awards on level ups, allowing the user some freedom from their class's path or fixing issues with their body. Alice thought back to a passage she had read in the library before being sold off to the merchants. Stat points can be gained and lost outside the system's direct influence. For example, suppose a warrior does not train regularly to maintain his strength and instead succumbs to gluttony. In this case, the warrior can expect a sharp decline in his STR and DEX stats. However, with regular training, the warrior can quickly regain what was lost. Another example would be an archmage growing old and developing memory loss. Again, this unfortunate mage can expect a decline in his INT and WIS stats. Although her burning ass demanded it, Alice still felt investing all her unspent points in her con stat was the correct decision. Not only did the con stat make her more robust, but it also directly increased her lifespan by a few years for each point. As it was her lowest stat and only increased by 1 with each level, she felt it was a good one to invest in. So, with a hesitant finger, she reached out, selected her con stat, and smashed the plus button until all 18 points were assigned. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 30. STR, 48, DEX, 60, Con, 48, plus 18, Int, 108, Wis, 100. Unspent points, 0. Slave. The mana in the surroundings shuddered and surged against Alice's skin. She closed her eyes tight and felt the mana forcefully working through her body. Despite the likely horrific things it was doing to forcefully increase her lifespan and strengthen her muscles, it felt numb and worn. After a few seconds, the pleasant feeling washed away, and she took a sharp breath of dusty air. Coughing her lungs out, Alice opened a teary eye, and through the plumes of dust, she saw titanic shifting black plates with neon green flesh hidden below. One of the Lord's pets, I guess. Alice had never seen such a sinister and massive-looking creature before. Straining her neck, Alice couldn't glimpse the top of the beast, even though it was half submerged as it plowed through the rock alongside her. Alice beckoned the blue screens to vanish with a wave of her hand. The pain from riding had numbed a bit, so she could focus on what was happening. Glancing around, she saw a corridor of dull grey stone. Its only interesting feature was how vast the space was. Alice looked up to the ceiling and gulped. Flying overhead and blanketing the whole area under its enormous presence was a golden dragon. It was smaller than the one slain by her and the Lord. But it was still impressive with its shiny golden scales that shimmered under the glowstone light. Alice realized she had been far too distracted with her downed blue screens and had no idea what was going on. So, with no one else to ask except the knight guiding the horse, she asked, "Sir Knight, who are you?" Alice yelled over the absurd record of riding next to a creature that could consume mountains. A handsome face with ruby eyes and midnight black hair looked over his shoulder at Alice and responded, "You don't recognize me." Alice squinted her eyes. The lighting was dim. Although the face was much smoother, the proportions were similar to the leader of the merchants. "Henry?" Alice asked in a low voice, unsure of herself. "Aye, it is me." Henry chuckled and turned his head back to the front. Only now did Alice notice that Henry's body had no legs and he was, in fact, attached to the horse. "You're a horse now." Henry swapped his hand to hold his midnight spear and claned his ear with a finger. "Don't scream into my ear, woman. They became more sensitive ever since my transformation." "So you got the same treatment as the other merchants then?" Alice recalled how Bob and Terry had turned out. Compared to those two imbeciles, Henry had actually improved rather than downgraded. Henry shrugged. "I got lucky compared to them. The Overlord combined me with a horse, now I'm an apocalypse horseman. Whatever that means." Alice's eyes went wide. Could the Lord create undead chimeras? How fascinating. Alice grinned and asked, "I wonder if he could turn me into one." Henry laughed. "You would have to die first." Alice tightened her grip as Henry sped up to match the massive creature's pace. "So, explain," Alice demanded. "What's happening? What is that and that?" She pointed at the undead mountain eater and the flying lizard. "The Overlord calls that thing Wiggles." "No, I don't know why." Henry then gestured skywards with his spear. "And that arrogant lizard is genus Arkgold, a dragon hailing from a noble family." Alice groaned. "How are there nobles in every society?" "Strength rules over the weak," Henry responded with certainty. "Don't like it. Become so strong that you can change it yourself. Create a new system or abolish the old. The strong can do anything they like. The Overlord is likely strong enough." Alice grumbled, and Henry surprisingly heard her and nodded. "That is why I follow him." Alice thought back to her rocketing stats and smiled. So long as she stayed in his party and he remained in range for the party features to function, she would gain immense amounts of EXP, and soon she would rival even heroes of old. Well, assuming they kept killing senior dragons without being obliterated by a stronger dragon, such as Hiverth Arkspace. "So where are we going?" Alice said with confusion as she shuffled closer and looked over Henry's shoulder. Henry awkwardly coughed as he felt Alice's chest against his back but replied, "Into the dungeon. Deeper, the better. We have dragons hot on our tail, so the only way is down." Alice squinted, but she couldn't pierce the darkness and see anything other than an enormous corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Alice flinched as a sonic boom echoed down the stone walls. Her eardrums tingled and she felt a headache coming along. She cast a nervous glance over her shoulder and moved her black hair out of her eyes. The scene in the far distance was apocalyptic. Hellfire illuminated the walls as a silver and black dragon tumbled around with a few smaller dragons. Flames erupted from the younger dragon's mouths and melted away the two defending dragon scales and flesh. Alice could see in her mage sight that dark energy was flowing down the corridor from around them and regenerating the 2 zombie dragons of their wounds. My 2 dragon puppets will hold for a while longer. The dungeon's entrance is just up ahead. The Overlord's familiar ancient voice sounded from all angles and helped calm Alice's mind. She felt safer with a monster that could kill 2 senior dragons by her side. Alice ignored the sounds of destruction from behind and focused on the path. A path to her new future. One where she would hopefully stand at the pinnacle for a change. Chapter 25. Stairway to the Gods. Victor floated on ahead and felt a wave of chaotic mana assault him. He quickly brought up his status page to check for any anomalies. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 305. STR 68820, DEX 68820, Con 68820, Int 68820, WIS 68820. Life force unstable, 19 hours and 7 minutes, slight mana sickness. Skills happy smiley. Consume X. Raise undead X. Shadow magic X. Annihilating aura X. Freezing cone 7. Stealth X. Doom Ray X. Spirit movement 6, a level up. Slight mana sickness. Victor observed his stats decline at their usual rate, so he closed the blue screen and concentrated on the incredible view. The plain stone tunnel fanned out into a massive space. A marble dome thousands of meters up was illuminated by a giant piece of floating glowstone that acted as a miniature sun. It almost felt like he was outside rather than deep underground. The stone floor was replaced with an endless meadow. Lush green grass with the occasional small groupings of white trees surrounding crystal clear ponds littered the land. Victor could even hear the chirping birds and the low buzz of insects. Compared to the frost-covered wasteland on the surface, the dungeon appeared to be in the height of summer. In the far distance, Victor could make out a tower of stone that reached all the way to the dome. It appeared slim, but Victor speculated it was at least a few kilometers in diameter. This is the first time I have ever been in a dungeon, but I have played enough games to know that an ominous tower is bound to be important. Victor toggled on his annihilating aura, and his vicious death affinity mana pulsed in waves. It was rather sad for the beautiful symphony of summer to cease, apart from the occasional thud of bird corpses falling out of trees. But the bubbling feeling of his life force surging with more stat points offset the misery he caused. A moment later, the rest of his company arrived at the clearing to the meadow. Henry raised his spear as if ready for a fight while Alice glanced around with amazement. Genus flew overhead, but as he approached Victor, he seemed to halt as if sensing something dangerous. Seeing the dragon's hesitance to get within 100 meters of him, Victor realized the dragon was feeling the effects of his annihilating aura. This is why I have Alice in my party, because the system protects party members from each other's area of effect spells like my annihilating aura. Genus, Victor spoke, and the dragon stiffened in fear. Are you able to join my party? Party? Genus tilted his head in confusion. Is that a human thing? Human thing? Can dragons not access the system? No. Genus spat to the side. The system was granted by a higher power long ago to give those weaklings a chance against us. I heard that before the system, the humans were merely slaves to the mystical races. Genus growled as he glanced at Alice riding on Henry's back. We must eat and sleep for hundreds of years in mana-rich areas to grow in power. Meanwhile, these lower lifeforms get handed power for free. Victor frowned. Why do I have access to the system then? Although I am missing features that Alice has, it still works for the most part. My stats go up every level, and I can level my abilities by using them. Victor knew he had a lot of things to work out and discuss, but now was not a good time. Despite the distance, Victor could still hear the roars of battle occurring deep in the tunnel. His stats were still being drained to keep regenerating the zombie dragons, and he could feel his link to them weakening. Either he was too far away, or there was a limit on how much he could regenerate a corpse before it died, and he had to cast a Raise Undead on it once again. Genus, you frequent this dungeon as a noble dragon, right? Victor asked from stealth, and the dragon nodded in the wrong direction. Indeed, I have been here a few times. We use this floor of the dungeon to nurture our young. There are dragons here? Henry asked from the ground as he trotted closer to their position, spear at the ready in his right hand. Genus nodded his long neck, and his golden scales gleamed under the glowstone light. Around the tower, it's where the mana is most dense. What is the purpose of the tower? Alice shouted from Henry's back up at the dragon. Genus's rainbow eyes gazed into the distance. It's the stairway to the gods. The gods? Alice mumbled while racking her brain about the many stories she had heard involving dungeons. As a merchant girl, she had mostly ignored the intricacy of dungeons. Instead, she focused on the money-making aspect, such as monster corpses and rare minerals that grew in the dungeon's lower depths. Ah. There are stories about renowned adamantite delvers that reached the lowest floors. Apparently, the goddess will grant a single wish. What did they wish for? Genus asked the question on Victor's mind. Victor had a few ideas, but the answer surprised him. Evolution. Alice nodded to herself. A few asked for loved ones to be resurrected or for incurable illnesses to be cured. But the vast majority requested to be evolved. Alice caressed her chin as she spoke. I may be wrong, but I believe humans naturally evolve at level 100 into high humans. They are basically a legend as very few are alive to this day. However, they had vastly increased lifespans and access to more of the system's classes. What about the other races? Humans are the only ones to reach the bottom, right? Victor asked, and his ancient voice rolled across the meadow. Actually, let's talk while we move. My zombie dragons will falter sooner rather than later. So let's head to the tower. Everyone agreed, so they continued conversing while heading to the center. Before answering Victor's question, Alice asked, could Wiggles dig a hole to the next level? Without stopping, Victor commanded Wiggles, tunneling below their feet, to dive deeper. Wiggles accepted the command, and Henry almost lost his footing as the ground shook and the titanic earthworm headed vertically downwards. Finally, after a mile, Wiggles encountered a rock similar to the marble dome. It was coated in a dense mana shield identical to the one that protected the black tar dragon, except it was a glowing white rather than black. The mana shield was so dense that it almost appeared like mercury instead of opaque like the dragon's shield. It didn't even ripple as Wiggles rammed headfirst into it, but rather, it melted Wiggles' meter-thick armor plates and burned his neon green flesh. Alice shifted nervously on Henry's back as the Lord had gone quiet. No. Victor finally answered. There is a dense mana shield underground, so I assume the tower is the only way down. Alice nodded. Okay, it was worth a try. So, to answer your question. Indeed, races other than humans made it to the bottom, and some also requested evolution. So, if there was a higher form of their race, they were transformed into it, and for those races that didn't already have a higher form, well, they became a new race that had never existed before. Victor didn't wish to ask any more questions for fear of breaking his aloof persona that already showed signs of cracking. Although Alice still hadn't witnessed his true form, he doubted she thought of him as wise and all-powerful after this round of questions. But it was worth it. I now know a lot more about this world. It seems the system was given to the weaker human race to give them a fighting chance, but what about goblins? Don't they deserve the system? Or are they simply destined to be food for the more powerful monsters? Also, would I have been a dragon with access to the system if I picked dragon as my race? So many questions. The group traveled for a few hours before the tower came into view. As Victor suspected, it was absolutely immense. It was wider than multiple football stadiums placed next to each other, and it was tall enough to give Mount Everest a run for its money. It was constructed from that blindingly white stone and shone with power as the dense mana shield covered its surface. But perhaps the most bizarre part was the hundreds of dragon eggs surrounding the tower for miles and dragons with various colored chrome scales gliding down towards them. Chapter 26. Black Magic. Alice struggled to keep up with the slaughter. She didn't even have time to summon her trusty blue screens to check on her ever-increasing level. Dragon roars shook the skies. Alice squinted as she witnessed another dragon crash into the white tower with a gaping wound in its head. Then, before the dragon corpse even grazed the ground, it began flapping its leathery wings with a dazed look. Death affinity mana swirled around its form as the dragon latched onto the back of the nearest chrome-scaled dragon and viciously bit into its neck. The two roared as they spiraled to the ground and, with a sickening crunch, flattened a couple dragon eggs, much to the still-alive dragon's despair. Henry focused on weaving through the chaos and avoiding being flattened by falling corpses. At the same time, Alice hurled a fireball and ice bolt at any dragon within her range. Her mana pool was more extensive than expected, and she had no issues throwing 2 spells every second. Alice could, of course, invest more mana into each attack to increase their potency, but she instead focused on tagging each dragon with 1 spell to increase her EXP gains. Unfortunately, even with a fully powered-up fireball, she failed to leave even a burn mark on the Chrome Dragon scales, so she settled for mediocre shared EXP gains. Alice's vision briefly flashed white as thunder boomed through the clear skies. Purple lightning zapped a blue Chrome Dragon and annihilated its mana shield. A second later, a shadowy humanoid appeared, and then it vanished. The blue Chrome Dragon's decapitated head fell to the side, and the main body soon followed, both plummeted to the ground below. The Lord only appeared briefly after stunning everyone's vision with his lightning attack, so Alice was yet to get a clear picture of him. Much to her frustration, a shadowy arm here, a glimpse of a leg there, far too many blue eyes floating in the sky. She had seen a lot over the last few minutes, but nothing conclusive. Magic's applications were vast, and at the level of the Lord, he could be using illusions for all she knew to mask his true form. While frowning at her conundrum, a sick idea crossed the young mage's mind. A group of unguarded dragon eggs laid in their path. There were 4 in total. 2 eggs were the same sky blue as the blue Chrome Dragon that had died moments ago. One was midnight black as if it was an egg-shaped obsidian rock, and the final one was a striking orange. Alice raised a shaking arm and cautiously looked to the sky. Luckily, all the Chrome Dragons seemed distracted by the zombie dragons and the elusive Lord that continued hurling his purple lightning and skewering the dragons with his claws. Deciding it was safe to carry out her horrendous scheme, Alice condensed the mana in her body to her right hand. Since she was utilizing her full power, the fireball shifted from a calm orange to a hellish purple. Unfortunately, it hovered too close to her palm, causing her flesh to chisel. Alice quickly deployed her mana shield spell to protect her palm from the heat. Why is my mana black? Is it because the spirit of darkness blesses me? Alice scrutinized the onyx sheen of mana that coated her hand like a well-made glove. And why did I learn spells like a fireball and ice bolt from leveling up? Shouldn't I be given spells that fit the dark mage vein? Although I guess dark purple flames are rather ominous. Alice scolded herself for not concentrating more on non-merchant related knowledge. Hopefully, the Lord will teach me some evil spells, like necromancy or that purple lightning spell, although I have his stealth skills. When will I be able to vanish into thin air like he does? Shaking her head, Alice aimed and fired her ominous purple ball of fire. As it flew through the air, it let off no light and impacted one of the blue eggs. To Alice's surprise, the eggshell merely cracked rather than exploded as she had expected. Having committed to the sinful deed of slaughtering unborn dragons, Alice decided a spell designed to pierce defenses was the better option here. Having learned from last time, she preemptively cast Mana Shield on her hand. Then, after confirming the shield was in place, she willed all her remaining mana into an ice bolt. The usual crystal blue ice transformed into a spear of midnight similar to Henry's. The Apocalypse Horseman made a drastic turn to avoid a falling corpse. Alice used her left hand to hold tight and winced as a mansion-sized lizard's corpse bombed the meadow right next to them. With squinted eyes, Alice traced her mana and could feel the affected egg's direction through the dust clouds. Closing her eyes, Alice hurled the black ice spear, which ripped through the dust cloud like a crossbow bolt. Alice hurriedly summoned her status page to check the notifications. Blue Chrome Dragon Egg defeated. EXP awarded to all party members. Contribution has been calculated at 100%. EXP awarded 99.9% of total gain. Name Alice. Race Human. Level 41, level up X11. STR 59 plus 11, DEX 71 plus 11, Con 59 plus 11, Int 130 plus 22, WIS 122 plus 22. Unspent points 11. Slave. Blessing Darkness. Class Senior Black Mage. Subclass Apprentice Merchant. Divine Mission None. Skills. Class Skills. Stealth 2. Fireball V a level up. Ice Bolt 4 a level up X3. Mana Shield 2 a level up. Float INU. Mana sight INU. Subclass skills A. Fast counting IA. Identify A. Alice couldn't be happier seeing the immense gains she was receiving from this fight. I even graduated from a junior black mage to a senior one. There were over 10 notifications about slain dragons giving her 0.1% EXP, but the one that really stood out was the 99.9% EXP gain from killing the egg. Go for the eggs. We can exterminate them together. Alice shouted over the dragon roars from above. Henry surveyed the surroundings with his ruby eyes. Dragon eggs. Do they provide a lot of EXP? Seeing Alice nod, he licked his lips. All right then. Point the way. Henry realized he was of little use against flying targets, so going after the egg seemed like the best bet. Alice gestured towards where she had thrown the dark ice bolt moments ago, and Henry, being the nice horse he is, obliged and galloped in the direction. Alice had a menacing grin as the wind whipped her black hair in random directions. She didn't even feel the cold metal slave collar bouncing on her shoulders anymore. However, her eyes still burned from the constant horseback riding. With a shrug, she dumped all her unspent points on Con once again. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 41. STR, 59, DEX, 71, Con, 70, plus 11, Int, 130, WIS, 122. Unspent points, 0. Slave. She held her head back in ecstasy as the mana flooded her body. Her muscles became toned and denser, her skin smoother, and her cheeks rosier. Even her bust saw improvements which were becoming glaringly obvious as her lingerie was struggling to contain them. Alice inspected her abs and arms and nodded in appreciation. She had returned to a prime, if not better, while she was a pampered merchant's daughter. A month of malnourishment, rough nights and mistreatments had vanished as if they had never happened. But I will never forget those nights in that foul-smelling wagon, being served cold gruel that had been spat on. Even that feeling of helplessness when she was stared down by Wiggles and could smell that creature's rotting bathe. The humiliation was still fresh in her mind. Alice tightened her legs around Henry's body and freed her other hand from Henry's waist. Then, as the eggs came into view, she cast a mana shield on her entire upper body. Black mana coated her exposed skin, and then without holding anything back, she dual cast Fireball and Ice Bolt. Henry didn't even get a chance to stab his spear into the final blue-colored egg before it exploded from the spell assault. Grumbling, Henry switched targets. Before Alice could recharge her spells, he empowered his spear with an unknown skill causing it to glow with a red hue. With a grunt, Henry thrust his spear into the egg without mercy. The shell cracked, and when he drew back his spear, it was covered in slime and a severed black-scaled limb coated in blood. Oddly, Alice didn't find the sight disturbing. If anything, the presence of blood only fueled her eagerness to kill. She was determined to become stronger, and the sight of numbers going up and the euphoria from leveling only heightened her addiction to battle. Deciding to go with 2 empowered Ice Bolt S, Alice obliterated the remaining orange dragon egg. A second later, she felt a mana wave wash over her, signifying another level up and replenishing her spent reserves. Only 3 more levels until I gain a new spell. I wonder what it will be. Although Alice had limited knowledge about how classes progressed, she had confirmed that she gained a new spell every 5 levels. I wonder what will happen when I max out my Fireball spell. Alice scanned the surroundings and found another group of eggs. Only one way to find out. Chapter 27. Mana Sickness. A weird emotion bubbled in Victor's chest as over 20 dragons bowed their heads in a ring around his avatar. With many stat points to play with, Victor had resummoned his shadowy avatar that appeared as a tall man with indescribable features and a fancy top hat. Alice was off to the side, floating in the air. Well, that is new. Since when could she float around like me? Dense raven mana coated every inch of her pale skin like a latex suit of armor. Only her head was uncovered, with her black hair flowing freely down her rear like a cape. Alice's enchanting pink eyes didn't even acknowledge the epic scene. Instead, they were busy scrutinizing the air in front of her face. Victor obviously couldn't see the screens, but he could summon the party screen to get some idea. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 49, level up. X8. STR 67, DEX 79, Con 78, Int 146, Wis 138. Slave. Name unknown. Race unknown. Level 307, level up. X2. STR 360000, DEX 360000, Con 360000, Int 360000, Wis 360,000. Life force unstable 100:00:00, slight mana sickness. Name Terry. Error, connection lost. She's still so weaker. Victor had become desensitized to the system's portrayal of stats. Perhaps the amount of STR or Con mattered to a fleshy body, but to him, stat points were merely a form of fuel to power his spells. Actually, looking at this party page has reminded me of something. Terry. I need to contact him again. But perhaps now is not the best time. Victor knew he was delaying something vital. But he was far too vulnerable right now to waste hundreds of thousands of stat points on a cross-universe telephone call. He had questions and he was itching for answers. But rather hilariously, his survival was more important right now. Down dragons, although the thrill of a real threat is nice, now is not the best time. Victor swore he almost died of boredom over the past few months exploring the endless forest, and now everything was happening at once. He was in a magical dungeon under the most powerful racist stronghold. He had broken into their prison, caused mass murder, slaughtered their unborn children, and raised them to serve him. All in a single day. Ain't no rest for the wicked. Victor hummed to himself as he thought about his next move. He needed to go down. So far down until he found something. Victor wasn't sure what he desired. But either a resolution to his falling stats or monsters he could raise from the dead so powerful that even Hiveth Arkspace would have to think twice about attacking him. Did such a solution or monster exist? Probably not, but he was in too deep. Cracked eggs filled with bloody slime lay all around, and their guardians now served him in death. No amount of diplomacy could save this situation now. Right. Victor's avatar exclaimed, and everyone paid attention. Even Genus as he flew circles overhead. Once again, we will be making a tactical retreat. A cane of pure shadows appeared in the avatar's hand and pointed at the smallest undead dragon. You will be Alice's new mount. We must move fast, and horseback riding is a poor solution. The car-sized black lizard bowed its head and strode over to Alice's side. The girl seemed bewildered, and it took some convincing from the dragon for Alice to climb up its lowered wing and secure herself around the base of its neck. Good, Victor said, and the avatar spun around on its heel and pointed towards the dungeon's entrance with its cane. I have lost connection with the two senior dragon zombies, so the rest of you will continue their jobs. Stop any dragon from reaching the second floor. That is your final order. The ground rumbled, and dust flew into the air as 19 chrome dragons from various noble houses rose to serve their new overlord and took to the skies. Victor spread out his long shadowy arms and went all out with his shadow magic for the first time in a while. Stat points evaporated as if they were free. Victor first targeted the glowstone sun hanging overhead. A cone of dense shadows shot out and, within seconds, enveloped the titanic piece of glowstone. Darkness blanketed the land, with day suddenly shifting to night. But Victor wasn't done. He wasn't sure if all dragons feared the dark like Genus or if it was just because they had been underground. Still, anything to potentially slow down their pursuers and give an advantage to his zombie dragons was a risk worth taking. A dense fog of shadows spread out and enveloped most of the dome. Even if someone summoned a light spell, it would fail to pierce more than a few meters. Roars sounded from afar. Victor's zombies had encountered some resistance. Time to move, Victor said, and he directed Alice's dragon mount towards the apparent entrance to the tower. Genus carefully landed on the ground and gracefully accepted Victor's avatar's guidance as he struggled to pierce the darkness. The inside of the tower was far more impressive than Victor expected. A stairwell of mystical crystal spiraled down into the abyss. Victor almost believed the stairwell led to the void, but dense mana suggested otherwise. His memories of his first moments in this world were a little blurred, but he definitely remembered the lack of mana in the air. So where does this lead? The second floor, perhaps. How many floors are there? Victor had many questions, so he decided to ask his new dragon friend. Genus, tell me about the dungeon. Victor's avatar that stood weightlessly on his back strolled along the dragon spine. How many floors are there? What can we expect? Genus grumbled as he slowly descended the stairs. Well, there's no flying allowed in the stairwell. Or rather, I am incapable of doing so. Genus plodded down a few more steps, his claws scraping against the blue crystal surface, leaving no marks. The dungeon has many odd rules like that. Does this stairwell lead to the last floor? Alice asked from atop her black dragon mount. No, Genus replied. We don't even know how many floors this dungeon has, although we suspect it's around the 100 range. Each floor has a tower that leads to the next floor. Therefore, to get to the expected final floor, we must go down 100 different towers. Why have you never reached the final floor? Victor was very curious about this. The dragons had controlled this land for centuries, yet they had never ventured to the lowest floors. Various reasons. The noble dragon signed. Politics is a big one, but a more practical reason is nobody wants to. As biological creatures, we require food to survive, and only food acquired from the dungeon is edible. Same with materials. The dense mana will eventually melt away any clothing or weapons not made of dungeon materials. Many floors in a are consisting of nothing but undead, and the deeper we go, the more mana sickness we experience. Mana sickness. Victor summoned his status page, and sure enough, the mana sickness debuff was still there. He could feel the ambient mana gnawing away at his existence. But dragons are magical creatures. Don't they relish in mana-rich environments? Victor said, his voice echoing. Too much of anything is harmful. We slowly absorb the mana around us while we sleep, and passively direct the mana to improve our bodies and widen our mana pools. Genus explained. However, too much mana flowing through us is detrimental to our cultivation and can become toxic. Genus peeked at Alice, who proudly sat on her dragon mount, and continued. I may be wrong, but the system allows humans to do something similar. Alice nodded with a grin. Then, as if to demonstrate her point, she moved her finger in the air and tapped a few times. Everyone witnessed as mana condensed around Alice's form, flooded her body, and dissipated. Within seconds, Alice's skin had visually improved, and her body had fattened out slightly with toned muscles. Genus growled in his throat, his rainbow eyes shifting with various colors. See, the system must protect them from mana sickness. The sheer amount of mana she just absorbed is how much I process in a week, and not to mention the changes that occurred would take me months. No wonder system users have made it to the lower floors before. Victor frowned as the group continued down the endless stairs. I have the system, but it doesn't protect me from mana sickness. But Genus raises some good points. Although I should be able to endlessly advance down the dungeon floors, will Alice and Genus be able to follow? They are both living creatures, so a lack of food, water, and safe places to sleep could cause issues. Victor thought back to Earth. How did humans survive in hostile locations? Supply lines. During the World Wars, train lines were constructed to the front line, and supplies were brought in. Perhaps I can do something similar with my undead. Victor mulled over various solutions. The fact that the dragons were apprehensive of delving deeper into the dungeon gave him peace of mind, but it raised many new problems. First, he needed to keep Genus alive. But wait, how was he supposed to take over the dragons after slaughtering so many? So many problems. Not to mention Terry potentially being on Earth and the bizarre nature around my reincarnation. Victor shook his head and pressed on. Those were worries for the future. For now, he just needed to keep going down. Chapter 28. Servant of the Void, getting to feel superior to a dragon wasn't an everyday occurrence. So as Alice dumped her remaining 8 unspent points into her con stat, bringing it up to an impressive 86, she felt better than ever. She had debated focusing on a few other stats with her unspent points. But, right now, she needed a solid body to deal with the current circumstances. Strength. She was riding a freaking dragon. Dexterity. She didn't use a bow or practice calligraphy. Intelligence defined the size of her mana pool and a few other factors. But she was currently in a grand dungeon. The amount of mana circulating in the air was almost intoxicating, so she could replenish her mana pool quickly. Even with her slinging spells left and right on the first floor, she hadn't run into any issues due to her high INT and WIS stats. I gained 2 points in them with every level up anyway, but maybe I should stop investing in con for now. Especially since infusing more mana into my spells makes them stronger, having a higher mana pool is important for a mage. Alice wasn't controlling the dragon she was currently seated on, so she had plenty of time to think and plan. Keeping her legs around its neck, she laid back and stared up. The dragon's scales were cold against her bare skin and incredibly hard. Letting out a forced breath, she squinted, but even with a mana sight, she couldn't see the top of the tower. Just an endless spiral of crystal blue stairs around a central void. I should find this sight amazing, but perhaps I have become numb over the last few days. My life has become truly ridiculous, A smile emerged as she thought about the crazy stuff she had done. I threw a fucking fireball at a dragon's eye and it hit. The memory still made her giddy. We have reached the next floor. The Lord's ancient voice caught her attention. The gravity behind his words sent goosebumps down her spine. It was like a god had descended and was speaking into her brain. The floor's contents, monsters, treasures, do not matter. We have one objective. Reach the next tower as fast as possible. As we travel, I will raise those I kill and have them relay anything valuable, including food, to us as we dive deeper. If you need to sleep or anything else, let me know. Alice felt warm knowing the Lord was thinking about her. Although the words sounded a little cold, his heart was in the right place, assuming he even had one. They picked up the pace. The black zombie dragon soared straight through an open door at the tower's base and out into a dark wasteland. The wind whipped through her hair as they flew overhead. Down below was a graveyard filled with skeletons that wandered aimlessly. Some held chipped swords in their skeletal hands, and others wore tin hats on their smooth skulls. Alice straightened up. She wasn't sure why, but she felt more powerful than before. Dark attribute mana, Genus remarked from the side with a scowl. Rancid stuff to cultivate with. So it seems. Alice used a mana sight, and sure enough, the place was drowning in the stuff. I can see why dragons hate coming down here. Alice opened up her palm and summoned a fireball. She also coated her hand in a mana shield. Both appeared normal, but when Alice upped the power, the mana shield solidified and the fireball became a meter in width. If Alice hadn't jerked her head back and thrown up a mana shield around her entire body, she would have suffered from nasty burns. Alice freaked out and threw it away as if the fireball was a massive spider that had materialized on her palm. The orb of hellish purple flames descended like a doomsday bomb. Hundreds of skeletons looked up and dumbly raised their swords as judgment fell upon them. Alice blinked in confusion as the fireball acted strangely. Not only did it produce no light, but it splashed out when it hit the floor, spreading like a virus among the skeletons. Despite its size, the initial impact only affected a handful of them. But, within minutes, a mile radius was ablaze with purple hellfire as skeletons melted into puddles of liquid bone. Genus gave her a side look. Quite the spell you have there. It seems to lack the initial punch of a fireball, but that spreading effect is rather impressive. Perfect for burning these low-level cretins to the afterlife. Yeah, true dash. Level up. New class options available. The sudden notification startled Alice. She ignored Genus and the distraction below and summoned her status page. Name, Alice. Race, human. Level, 50, level up. STR, 68, DEX, 80, Con, 87, Int, 148, WIS, 140. Unspent points, 1. Slave. Blessing, darkness. Class, pending. Subclass, apprentice merchant. Divine mission, none. Skills, Class skills, Stealth 2. Fireball 7, level up. X4. Ice Bolt V, level up. X5. Mana Shield V, level up. X5. Float 3, level up. X3. Mana Sight 2, level up. X1. Telekinesis A new. Lightning Strike A new. Subclass skills, Fast counting IA. Identify IA. I finally hit level 50. Why is my class pending? Alice poked the screen, and although her finger went right through the floating blue screen, a new one appeared. Congratulations. Please pick your next class. Generating options. Archmage, common. Princess of Purple Flames, rare. Apostle of Darkness, rare. Servant of the Void, legendary. Alice browsed the options in awe. Of course, she had heard of archmages before. They were unthinkably powerful and had the wealth to match. They often frequented her father's auctions and were always good customers. Only now, with the option in front of her, did the ridiculousness of today set in. Those archmages were all old and established names. Some even had bards singing their legends in the taverns. Yet I became one in a single day. It was a hard truth to swallow, but Alice knew she couldn't get complacent. A lord so mighty he could slay 2 senior dragons in minutes was running away. The threat she faced was so grand that 50 levels wouldn't cut it. Heh. Archmages are considered common. Alice chuckled to herself. It was like being told kings were commoners or dragons were frogs. Archmages had been on par with the more powerful delvers in her mind, but now they had fallen a peg or two. Next floor, here we go, Gina said, and Alice swiped the screen to the side. Sure enough, a tower of pristine white bone shrouded in a dense black mana shield dominated her view. That was fast unless I was so distracted I didn't notice the time fly by. The group didn't even take a moment to pause as they flew through the entrance. Suddenly, a mighty force pressed down and compelled her dragon mount to walk on its legs. Dungeons sure are weird. We will keep going for at least another 10 or so hours. Let's try and reach the 5th floor by then. The Lord's voice boomed through the staircase, and the shadowy avatar standing effortlessly on Genus's back turned to her. Will that be fine? Alice nodded and replied, I dumped a lot into my con stat. I should be good for another day or 2 without sleep. Good. Let me know if you need anything else. Will do. The conversation died out, so Alice returned to her blue screens. She poked the screen, but nothing happened. Cheat system won't give me more details unless I pick the class. Alice grumbled to herself as she mulled over the options. Archmage was obviously out of the runnings as it was a common ranked class and Alice wanted to rule the world. How could she do that with a common class? She needed something to put her ahead of the competition. I have a unique opportunity here, thanks to the Lord. Not everyone gets to slay dragons as their first ever kill and leisurely conquer a grand dungeon atop a pet dragon. I need to stay useful to him. With Archmage crossed off, she had 3 choices remaining. Princess of Purple Flames, rare. Apostle of Darkness, rare. Servant of the Void, legendary. Princess. I like the sound of that. Alice stroked her chin. With how the class is phrased, it should focus on fire magic. My purple flames were impressively effective, but specializing in fire magic is risky, especially with dragons being my immediate threat. Although my unique trait, true damage, does make the class sound terrifying. Alice thought back on the description of black mags, and she could imagine raising cities with an archmage-level fireball that ignored magical defenses. Genus, Alice asked the golden dragon that plodded down the stairs beside her. HM. The dragon turned its titanic head to look at Alice. She felt tiny with those rainbow eyes that shifted with different colors staring at her. Without your mana shield, could you survive an empowered version of the fireball I used earlier? Genus grinned, showing off his razor-sharp teeth the size of her and snorted. We are practically born from fire. Even without my mana shield, my scales would protect me. That pathetic fire could only harm me if you threw it in my eye. What about down your throat? Silly question, I breathe fire. Alice felt stupid, so she returned to her screens and ignored the chuckling dragon. Princess of Purple Flames is a no-go then. Sad. The name was so enticing. That left her with 2 options. Apostle of Darkness, rare. And as Servant of the Void, legendary. Apostle of Darkness rubs me all the wrong ways. Although Alice enjoyed the powers her blessing had provided her, the class definitely wasn't worth being sold off as a slave and leaving behind her life in Eshna. the spirit of darkness has done nothing for me all this time, no matter how much I prayed. And she had fucking prayed her heart out. Every single day she sat in that shaking wooden carriage, praying to the goddess that had driven her to that state for anything, even just a loaf of bread to sate her hunger. But she had been ignored, cast away like some sick jerk, while she knew of heroes that received divine weapons or God-given skills from their patron spirits. That left her with one final option. Servant of the Void, a legendary class. One she had never heard of, just like all legendary classes. They were unique and specialized for a destined person. The question is why? What relationship do I have with the Void of all things, and why would I become its servant? But if there's one thing I know, it's that classes evolve as you level them. Today's servant is tomorrow's master. Alice raised her finger and hesitated before making her choice. She pressed her option, and everything changed. Chapter 29. Race. You are the first system user to make contact with a creature from the Void and survive more than 24 hours. You are the first system user to converse with a creature from the Void. A creature from the Void has taken an interest in you. You have been granted a legendary class. Servant of the Void. Evolution commenced. Alice felt cold. Not the coldness she felt on those frosty winter mornings back in Eshna, where the chill phased through her skin and dug deep into her bones, gnawing away at her joints until they ached in dull pain. No. This was a new type of cold, the empty kind that comes from within. She felt hollow. An endless void eating away from the inside. And that was odd. What had changed? She had been filled with excitement only moments ago. Heck, she had just unlocked a legendary class, for God's sake. Although the threats were mighty, she felt on the road to success. She opened her eyes and it was dark, but not. She could pierce the night just fine. Oh. A severe headache forced her to lay back on the hard, cold surface. Everything felt wrong, but her parched mouth and grumbling stomach forced her to soldier on. She shuddered as she forced herself to somewhat sit up. Oh, you're awake. Alice clutched her head with one hand while propping herself up with the other. Then, with great effort, she turned to the voice and saw a familiar shadowy man with a top hat. But the voice sounded different. It was less ancient and more pleasant sounding. She could also tell which direction the Lord's voice originated from, instead of it coming from everywhere. She looked up. A new skill, Void Eye, subconsciously activated, and she could see him. It was a mere outline, like a shadow behind an apple tree on a summer day, but she could see him. He was huge, looming over her like a guardian angel, actually more like a devil. So, is that the Lord's true form or a mere imitation of it? I am awake, where are we? Alice shook her head and decided to pretend she couldn't see the Lord's shadow and posed her question to the avatar. 23rd floor of the Grand Dungeon. You were asleep for a few days. The avatar awkwardly took off its top hat and held it in its shadowy hands. Alice tried her best to focus on the avatar and ignore the looming thing above her. So what happened? It asked in a weird tone as its featureless face looked her up and down. What a first. Alice croaked out. Her throat felt drier than a desert, and her stomach was trying to eat her alive. Perhaps that was the reason for the hollow feeling. Right, is stupid mortal flesh. The avatar said, even though the voice came from above her and sent shivers down her spine. Alice felt a mana pulse, but it was twisted and wrong. If not for a raging headache, she might have been able to discern the cause with her mana sight, but sitting up was the best she could do for now. The air rapidly cooled as magical ice coated a nearby boulder. Only now did Alice take in her surroundings. The 23rd floor appeared a bit more hospitable, but still not great. Grey sand encircled them with enormous obsidian boulders jutting out from dunes. Streams of bubbling lava slowly meandered between these dunes, originating from the many active volcanoes dominating the land. With her void eye, Alice saw the shadow move across the sky, and for a brief second, the Lord materialized. Then, with a swish of his claw, the boulder's tip was shaved off, and he vanished again. His avatar moved and collected the shaved-off piece in its shadowy hands, then returned to her and placed it on the black dragon scale beside her. Oh, I am lying on the black dragon still. No wonder my back aches so much. Alice's lungs burned with every breath she took due to the heat, yet the cone of ice stayed pristine and didn't melt. Melt it for water with your fireball spell. The avatar commanded as it wandered off, I will go find you something to eat, but it won't be pretty, that's for sure. Alice obliged and summoned a fireball and mana shield. Holy shit. Her jaw dropped open and her eyes couldn't believe what they saw. Before, her empowered fireball had been black with a purplish hue, but it was still fire, just a different color, but now it was just a ball of a nothing. Pure blackness that absorbed all light. It had a glossy finish as if it were a glass ball and was perfectly spherical. The mana shield followed a similar vein. It was so dense she couldn't see a hint of her pale skin below. It was as if the void had wrapped around her and formed solid armor. I see. I had no idea mortals could wield the void. The Lord remarked, and Alice stiffened. He's going to kill me, isn't he? Alice braced to meet a fate similar to that boulder and all those dragons. But her death never came. To Alice's surprise, he didn't do anything and continued on his way in search of food for her. She let out a deep breath and dispelled the spells. Then, despite her headache worsening, she squinted her eyes and summoned her status screen. I need to know what the hell happened to me. Evolution complete. Void affinity acquired. Name, Alice. Race. Level, 51, level up. STR, 69, DEX, 81, Con, 88, Int, 150, Wes, 142. Unspent points, 2. Slave, dulled emotions. Blessing, darkness and void. Class, servant of the void. Subclass, apprentice merchant. Divine mission, none. Okay, that is odd. Alice prodded the screen, her race showed question marks but the system, as usual, refused to elaborate. Her brows furrowed in annoyance. What did her race mean if it was 3 question marks? Was she no longer human? Looking down at her body, everything seemed somewhat normal. Her skin had become paler, almost anemic, and her nails had turned black and were sharp like claws. She reached up to her head and confirmed there weren't any horns, nor were there any wings sprouting from her back. So I haven't become a demon, but I have changed a bit. How weird. Also, since when did I have the blessing from the void? Did that come with my new class? Does the void even have spirits or a goddess? How can it be blessed by it? Alice concentrated on her status page once more. Her level had increased by 1 to 51. Party EXP over the last few days must have leveled me up. Alice nodded to herself as if everything made sense. She was sitting upon a zombie dragon, having a void creature fetch her food, and now the system couldn't even confirm if she was human or not. Okay, so my class has changed to a servant of the void. I wasn't sure before, but now I'm confident the Lord is a creature from the void. So am I his servant? I wanted to aid him, so I suppose that's fine for now. Did I gain any new skills with my new class? Alice opened up her skill list. Skills are. Class skills are. Stealth 2. Fireball 7. Ice Bolt V. Mana Shield V. Float 3. Mana Sight 2. Telekinesis I. Void IA new. Subclass skills are. Fast Counting I. Identify I. Void Eye. Alice cautiously activated the skill. Her pretty pink eyes were replaced with a swirling abyss. She looked around, but nothing looked different. I think this skill let me see the Lord before, but he isn't around anymore. I'll try it out again when he returns. But for now, I need a drink. Chapter 30. Sleeping Dragon. So she can use the void, huh? Victor watched her impressive display of magic with interest. Didn't expect humans to be able to wield the void, always assumed it was out of the system's jurisdiction, but I guess I was wrong. Victor shook his head and went to find the poor girl's food. If not for her high con stat, she would have starved to death or returned to her pathetic state from before. She had lost a bit of muscle and fat, but overall she looked all right. Nothing a little food couldn't fix, but that was the major problem. Genus, Victor said through his avatar as he crested the rim of a volcano some 10 minutes away from where he had left Alice. Hey! Wake up! The noble golden dragon opened a tired eyelid and stared at the avatar. What? He snarled, but his tone sounded colder than usual. Dragons hate being woken up, noted. This was the first time in days that Genus had been allowed to sleep, unlike Alice, who had slept the entire journey soundly. The two had traveled in silence, trying to preserve their energy at any cost. You have been sleeping for 8 hours, don't be so grouchy. Genus snorted, but it lacked the motivation behind it. Even to Victor's untrained eye, it was clear the dragon had lost some weight and was exhausted. 8 hours is nothing. I can sleep for weeks, sometimes even months. Genus slowly closed his eye again. Are they following us? Not for now, Victor replied. He had left many undead minions throughout the Grand Dungeon and used them to monitor the dragon's progress. To his surprise, it seemed they had mostly given up. It seemed your idea to take the last few dragon eggs and run off in different directions was a good idea. When they reached the second floor, Genus had suggested that Victor command his undead dragons to loop back to the tower and take the remaining dragon eggs hostage. They would then fly in different directions to force the dragons that came due to the disturbance to split their manpower. Honestly, it would be a miracle if they followed us. We left no evidence behind except destruction and zombie dragons. A few may have seen us from afar, but to organize a search party willing to chase us down will take weeks, if not months. Really? Why? Victor's avatar asked as it wandered around. Genus reopened his eye and followed the avatar's movements with his rainbow eyes. Dragons are complicated and selfish. Genus snorted and smoke plumed from his nostrils. Before the Grand Dungeon takeover, we used to live in separate groups spread across the continent, and we still do. Each family only sent a few members, some more, some less. But the point is, even if every dragon here died, their clans would live on. So, politics. It would take one of the elder dragons to take us down, and they would all refuse to move over some cold eggs. Genus uncoiled his neck from his sleeping position, spread out his paws, and yawned. I feel awful. I heard stories about this place, but it's much worse than I thought. Victor had to agree with his oversized lizard companion on that. Yeah, it's a lot more ridiculous than I thought. 10 floors of straight undead graveyards, followed by floors of endless oceans and nothing else. No wonder your kin aren't interested in this hardship, especially the ocean floors. You couldn't rest for 2 days. Genus grumbled. And I can't rest now either because you keep bothering me. So why are you here? Do you have any food left over? There were some slugs you found. Did you eat them all? Victor's avatar put a palm over where its eyes should be and scanned the dragon's lair. They tasted rancid, just like the manna on those graveyard floors. But at least the manna is much better here. The fire element was always one of my favorites to sleep in, nice and comfortable. Genus rolled over, sending gray sand flying as he shifted his enormous body. Those scrumptious slugs are in a pile over there. His wing pivoted its tip toward the far corner. There was indeed a gray clump of some kind of meat covered in gray sand. All right, thank you, Genus. We will stay on this floor for a while, so sleep well. We have a long journey ahead since the distance between each tower is increasing exponentially. The dragon grunted in agreement and went back to sleep. Victor used his avatar to grab some meat and headed back to Alice. Since she can use the void, are there other humans that can wield void magic? Maybe I can find one powerful enough to fix my falling stats, like using them as a portable battery. The idea was a bit sinister, but if he treated them well, it should be fine. Returning to Alice, he dumped the meat. She looked at it as if it was cursed and wouldn't touch it with a 10-meter pole, but alas, she had no choice. Slugs were the only food they had found so far. I still count my lucky stars that I picked Netherborne as my race and don't have to eat or sleep. Looking at that pile of grey meat oozing with white pus makes me want to gag. Victor noticed a small pile of shit and urine behind the dragon. Yep, don't miss those bodily functions one bit. Also, ever since entering this dungeon, the idea of stat points has become a joke to me. Name, Victor. Race, Netherborne. Level, 387, level up. X80. STR, 6004800, DEX, 6007840, Con, 6007840, Int, 6007840, WIS, 6007840. Life force unstable, 16,668 hours, mana sickness. Skills happy smiley. Consume X. Raise undead X. Shadow magic X. Annihilating aura X. Freezing cone 9, level up. X2. Stealth X. Doom ray X. Spirit movement 8, a level up. X2. Although his status had ballooned, so had the mana sickness. Apart from feeling suffocated, it didn't affect him too much. But if it gets worse the further we go down, I may start burning a lot more life force to exist each second. Luckily, apart from the uncomfortable feeling, this dungeon is so filled with mobs for me to slaughter that I could lose 10 points a second and still be fine. While doing some quick maths, Victor found he had over 2 years worth of status points at his current loss rate to play with. Although they still fell, he felt better knowing he had such a massive buffer. Which means it's time for that Cross Universe phone call. A part of him had been dreading trying to contact Terry. Did he really want to know what was happening on Earth? How his parents treated his death? Was Terry even on his Earth or some alternate one? Victor moved far away from the group. Only Wiggles diligently followed along a mile or so beneath his feet. He could tell he was there without even using his undead connection. The sand shifted even this far up as the titanic earthworm made its way below. Finding an excellent isolated location, Victor flashed an annihilating aura with maximum power to extinguish anything below level 100 in a 10-mile radius. He entered the black ocean in his mind with nothing to bother him. It was packed with millions, if not hundreds of millions, of undead on the various floors. Victor now had complete control over the undead residing over the first 10 floors and had leviathans, sharks and other aquatic monsters on the ocean floors. But those didn't interest him. No, the single fleck of light in the distant void did. Terry. We need to talk. He shoved an impressive 10% of his total stat points into this transmission. And then he waited. A few hours passed. Victor waited patiently while debating the many topics to discuss. Do I care what happened to me? What if I'm still alive? That idea haunted him. If he was still alive back on Earth, then who was he? Where did he come from? Boss? How are you? Munching sounds accompanied Terry's casual voice. Are you eating? Another few hundred stat points vanished with those words, but Victor didn't mind. He would speak as much as he wanted. There was a slight delay between messages as if they had terrible phone reception. At the movies with my mates. This popcorn thing is wicked. Victor didn't know what to say. Should he be happy Terry fitted in so well? Or concerned for the human race that they still hadn't worked out Terry was a zombie? Was he really that good at acting? Was Terry secretly a genius at avoiding the government? What's the name of the planet you are on? Victor asked. You're John. Where are we, mate? No, I know we are at the cinema, you moron, listen to me. What the hell is in New York? Ha ha ha, what happened to the original York? You are such a riot. Give that here. More rustling sounds of popcorn and slurping noises, oh vanilla flavor, yeah. Good stuff, this. Victor ignored the idiot. New York, that is to be Earth, or wow, going back to Earth is possible. How did Terry even get there? Terry, how did you arrive on Earth? Earth? What the hell is that? No, you shut up, John. This movie fucking sucks anyway. Why did you bring me here? Oh, to escape Jessica. Yeah, she's a real bitch. Terry loudly ate another mouthful of popcorn. Anyway, sorry, boss, what did you say? Victor had never wanted to hang up a phone call more in his life. Terry, how did you arrive where you are now? The bus. He answered with resolute certainty. Sometimes we take the subway, but they were closed today. Terry, you died. What happened next? What followed was an hour-long incoherent ramble from Terry about how he and John became best pals while working on Zombieland Season 2. And how they are now working on another show together. And that is how I ended up here. He finished and took a deep slurp from his milkshake. Victor had undoubtedly confirmed that Terry was on Earth and was in the period he had been in when he died. Terry had purchased the latest iPhone, one version higher than the one that had been out when Victor was alive. So some time had passed, but not much. Maybe a year at most. Terry, can you search on your phone for a person called Victor Harrison? Did he die? I'll take a look. 1 second. Victor held his breath.